Hello everyone, this is Brittany from Create With Me, and today I'm going to show you how to make a silicone mold at home that you can use to make resin casts of any object that does not have sulfur in it. The reason we don't cast objects that have sulfur is because the silicone platinum stuff that I use does not cure around sulfur. So you need your object you're going to cast. I like to use cookie cutter molds that have a lip around the bottom, something to stir your silicone with. I use a urine specimen cup. I bought like 20 of these on Amazon. I like to use these because they're graduated and you can pull resin and silicone out of the inside so they're reusable until they crack. You're going to need a 2-part silicone, and you will need a glue gun with glue in it, and packing tape. The first thing I like to do is plug in my glue gun to make sure that it's going to be properly heated. Then after that I get 2 pieces of this packing tape and I overlap them sticky side up and make sure that I close that seal all the way. And then I put the object that I'm going to be casting back down. If your object isn't smooth on the back, you can either choose to sand it if it's sandable, or if it's not, you can always choose to just have it like this mold here, where the back was actually a little bit smaller than the whole of the base, and I just very gently took it out and I have some pieces overlapping, that way it looks more identical to the original. But fortunately this one has a pretty flat back. I like to smooth it down, make sure it's really sticking on there on all the flat edges. And then I usually get my cookie cutter, and this is actually pretty good. I'm just going to flatten it just a little bit on the tops to accommodate the ears better. Just a little bit, and make it more forgiving to the shape. And I just lay it over the shape of whatever it is I'm casting. Try to keep your tape nice and smooth on the bottom if you can. That will transfer over to a smoother cast. Not that it really matters, because the bottom, what will be the bottom of the cast is going to be the top, and that'll smooth out perfectly, which is nice. And then once you've done this, this is where the hot glue comes into play. You're going to put hot glue around the edges. And what this is going to do is it's going to keep your silicone from leaking out, which is, first of all, just a huge mess. It's also a waste of materials, and it means you're going to have to redo your mold, which, you know, this stuff isn't exactly super cheap, so you want to kind of do this as little as possible. And getting a perfect cast the first time is always really nice. So we're going to give that about a minute to cool down, and then we're going to move on to our next step. The next thing we're going to be doing is mixing our 2-part silicone. So I've put off my mold to the side so that way I can go ahead and start doing this. And I'm just to be safe, I'm going to measure out 1.5 and 1.5 ounces of each, so 3 ounces total. If I have a little bit extra, I normally have a mold to the side that I'm ready to make as well, just in case I'm able to make an extra cast. Sometimes you have silicone left over and you're able to make a second one, which is always a bonus. Sometimes you don't have enough to make a full cast, and that's alright too, because you can always do it in layers as well, which is super awesome. As long as you keep it dust free, doing it in more than one layer is fine. The great thing about this particular silicone is I can't remember the word right now. It is, oh yeah, so I think it's low viscosity is whenever it's very thin, or maybe it's a low viscosity. So when you're mixing it up, the bubbles are going to rise really, really fast, so you're not going to have to worry about bubbles being all over your piece and your mold being imperfect. So you're just going to make sure that you mix this until both colors are completely mixed and there's no white left. So once we have our silicone all nice and mixed, we're going to go ahead and pour it starting at the lowest point of the mold. You don't want to pour it directly on the item because it'll naturally fill in the cracks better if you go at the lowest point. So usually try to aim it towards a piece of tape if you have any tape visible. Sometimes the items that we mold are difficult and the tape is not visible on them. You don't want to do it too fast. You want to let it slowly fill in any awesome details that you have in your piece. But if, for instance, you're doing just something that's completely smooth, like a circle or something, you could do it pretty fast if you wanted. Again, you don't really have to worry about bubbles, which is great with this brand, and I'll make sure to keep all the links in my caption. You want to completely go up to the tip of the cookie cutter. Generally, you don't have to, but because this is a rather awkwardly tall item, I'm going to go ahead and go all the way up. You don't want it to be too thin at the highest point of your item, otherwise you could accidentally, when you're demolding, you could accidentally punch through that area and then you have a ruined mold and all the effort was for nothing. So we're going to go ahead and wait a minimum of 12 hours. I'm going to do at least 24, and then we're going to come back to this and demold it and see our awesome mold. Alright, so it's been 24 hours. We're going to go ahead and demold our cat that we made a mold of. So I like to break the hot glue from around the edges first to make it a little bit easier, and then I stick my nail under just a little edge, and then it instantly separates. And it looks like we got a perfect cast, at least on the bottom, because there's no overlapping around the edges, which is always really nice. So then you're just gonna push on the silicone to go ahead and loosen it up. And it's gonna be a little bit harder because this is a full thickness mold. So sometimes I like to separate the edges first. Might be easier to slide it out. Should have thought better about this and used a bigger mold. Alright, so I had to go off camera and do that because it was being a little difficult, but I do have a second mold to the side that I will be demolding from the cookie cutter. Anyway, this is the moment of truth. So I like to just pull away gently whenever I'm demolding an original, especially when it has a lot of fine lines. There you have it. A perfect cast. And the thing about this one is since it's a matte finish, the mold is going to be matte as well. If you have a matte item like this and you want it to have a shine so you can buff pigments into it, make them shinier, you can always go over this with a really light coat of resin to make it shiny, or even just highlight certain parts. I'm probably going to go over the eyes only, and then also do a shiny cast of this cat for the eyes as well. Just a few things to go over when taking care of these. You want to make sure that you don't get dust, hair, any random junk inside, because that's going to end up damaging your mold. Not that the dust damages it, but you trying to clean your mold will damage it. So what I like to do is I'll get a piece of packing tape or laminating paper, the self-stick kind that goes over like tables and stuff, and I'll just keep it over my molds that are silicone, so that way whenever I'm not using them, they don't get dust inside. If you don't have access to that, you can always store them face down as well. And if you get dust and stuff around the edges of it, you can use packing tape to use a sticky side, and you can pick up dirt and dust. You can also, to a certain degree, depending on where the dust is located on the inside, use packing tape as well on the inside. Don't clean out the inside of your mold with alcohol or anything abrasive. Soapy water is just fine. Make sure it's fully dried before you use it again. Do not apply a torch to this. It'll end up messing up the edges, and it can even completely ruin your mold if your resin doesn't cure properly. It ends up sticking to your silicone, and then you'll rip your mold. And that's it. So as I promised, here's a second mold that I made. So this one I'm actually just ripping off the tape. There we go. For a reason, this is a different brand of cookie cutter, and the glue doesn't like to come off of this one. It doesn't really matter, I can take it off later. But generally when you're making a mold and you don't fill it all the way up to the edge, you can just push out and then it comes out easily. Every now and then, whenever you make a mold like this, you'll see that the edges are raised. You can trim that with a scissor just to make sure that this is completely flat when you're laying it down. It should be pretty even, but depending on the surface you have it on, it might not be completely even. You will see that there's like a slight little overlap right here. I mean, this is small, so I can just remove it with my finger. Sometimes you're going to need an X-Acto knife to remove that before you take your piece out. It'll make it a lot easier to trim any issues you have. So I'm just going to take out these pieces. I decided to make some little aliens because I lost my, my mold for these. Or I can't find it, I don't know, but they were plastic molds anyway, and I don't really like those, so sometimes I'll buy plastic molds, or if a plastic mold comes in a set, I'll end up remolding it for personal use, just so I can use a silicone mold, which I much prefer because pigments will stick to it, and that's another benefit of a silicone mold versus a plastic mold.